John Uriarte. I'm a curator of the digital program at the Photographers Gallery here in London. Welcome all to Seeing Double, documenting mixed reality in the museum and beyond. This event today is part of one of the research strands in which the Photographers Gallery digital program is working on right now. We have different fields open right now, looking into machine vision and to creating the network image, or into the environmental impact of the network images. In fact, I did want to mention that we have currently a call open for a funded PhD project in collaboration with the Center for the Study of the Network Image based in London South Bank University. It's a call which the deadline is on March 10th for a project, for a PhD project to start in September this year. We will post the link to the call shortly on the chat. And going back to this event is part of research documenting digital art that included other previous events that you can find on our website in collaboration with the University of Exeter, with Lima Foundation in Amsterdam, with the Center of the Study of the Network Image, London South Bank University, and with the Photographers Gallery, that is funded by the UK's Arts and Humanities Research Council. We at the gallery are especially interested on this event because it's looking into documented mixed reality. And again, it's part of our research project, but also we have a project working with augmented reality, open space. And that's why we are like particularly interested on hearing the speakers today. I'm going to pass it over now to my colleague Ari Frosch, who will explain a little bit about this project of augmented reality that we are working on.
Sure. Yeah, thanks, John. And yeah, hi, everyone. As John mentioned, a particular focus since September 2021 for us has been an augmented reality initiative called Open Space. It's involved 3 site-specific augmented reality commissions that have taken place on the streets around the gallery, as well as 6 augmented reality commissions that were released only online. And we used a range of methods for these commissions. It was like from image triggers printed on large vinyl posters that led to 3D animations in like a dedicated app, or using GPS for browser-based AR, as well as tapping into ready-made software provided by social media platforms such as Metaspark Studio. And this AR initiative has raised quite a number of questions for us about documentation of mixed reality projects. We found ourselves using a mix of traditional exhibition photography of the streets outside the gallery, which gives a partial kind of sense of the grounding of the works, along with online screenshots and capturing of Instagram stories, for example. And as the Photographers Gallery is an institution without a permanent collection, a lot of our immediate questions have been around how these AR pieces are captured and represented and archived. Though across the digital program, we're also concerned with how these works might continue or be conserved or resurface. Many of our commissions on our website, Unthinking Photography, are hosted online in a live form for dedicated periods, and then they continue to exist online. This can be in the same way as the original work or as an interactive but archived form. We'll put a few links in the chat actually about some of the projects that myself and John just mentioned. I'm really looking forward to hearing the speakers tonight unpick some of the approaches to documentation and conservation of mixed reality. And I'll pass on to Katrina and Annet to give a larger introduction.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. And I was wondering if everyone might want to say hello and tell us where you're joining from in the chat. Where I am, it's 5:38 a.m. I'm joining us from Canberra, the glorious capital of Australia, and our guests are joining us from Italy, the US, and England. Hi, Annette. My glamorous colleague is joining us from Amsterdam, as you can see. So Annette and I will be chairing tonight's event, and as John mentioned, it's the final workshop for at the Photographers Gallery for the research project Documenting Digital Art, funded by the Arts and Humanities Research Council of the UK. And I should add that if you're interested in some of the questions that we'll be discussing tonight, you might be interested in a related event, Transformation Digital Art 2023, which will be held at Lima, Amsterdam on the 16th and 17th of March. And the symposium's first day will be dedicated to documentation as a critical strategy for digital art conservation, including an exploration of documenting VR and AI. Our strand of the project, hosted at the Photographers Gallery, has sought to explore how, from the Google Art project to the screenshot, photographic technologies continue to mediate our experience of art and culture. And at a time where art selfies mix with installation shots on Instagram, how are practices of audience documentation changing the status and meaning of art? How can institutions engage with this expanded field of documentation? And what are the implications for art history and cultural memory? And how is the pandemic changing the cultural value of documentation? So over the last 2 years, we have been running workshops, panels, and roundtables in which museum professionals, conservators, curators, theorists, historians, artists, Google Art camera engineers have come together to consider these questions. And so in today's final event, Seeing Double, Documenting Mixed Reality in the Museum and Beyond, we explore the traumatic curatorial headache of how mixed reality art should be documented from the perspective of conservators, artists, and technologists. And traditional forms, as we heard from Aria, of art documentation risk flattening the dynamic and relational aspects of interactive artworks, and often occlude the agency of the viewer and their experience. And furthermore, because immersive media, particularly AR, deploy camera technologies to present work and also to record it, documentation becomes a place where different regimes of representation and technologies of vision begin to intersect. Now, we're really excited to be welcoming our panelists tonight, and who are Paul Tennent from Nottingham University's Mixed Reality Lab, pioneering artist Tamiko Thiel joining us from Italy, and Sasha Arden from the time-based media conservation team at the Solomon R. Guggenheim Foundation and Museum, New York. And they will each speak for around 15 minutes each before we'll open up for a collective discussion. So please feel free, as you think of questions, to throw them in the chat, and we'll return to you later at that moment, or save up the questions you want to grill our panelists with and be ready to throw them down on the table in the last half hour. And I'm going to hand over to my colleague Annet, who's going to introduce our first speaker.
Great, thank you so much, Katrina. And also thank you to the Photographers Gallery, Sam, John, and Aria for hosting us here in this wonderful Zoom meeting. So first up, indeed, we have Tamiko Thiel, and a digital artist who works with an array of new media techniques, including AR, VR, video installation, net art, digital 2D, 3D, print, and what else? You know, I'm forgetting loads of other things. He's like all around. She's fascinated by the interplay of space, place, the body, and cultural identity. And her career has spanned 3 decades already, but still counting, using the possibilities of digital art in inventive and inspiring ways. Notable projects include a collaboration with no less than Steven Spielberg, Starbright World, AR interventions at MoMA, and the Venice Biennial, and Unexpected Growth, a digital installation commissioned by the Whitney Museum in 2018, and is now also in its collection, amongst others as well. Tamiko, please go ahead.
Thank you. So shall I just go immediately to full screen?
Yeah.
Okay, let's see. Leave off the audio. Oops, and get this out of here. Okay, and as usual, I can't see my own full screen because there's all these windows on top. Okay, but I think I can wing it. So I actually am starting out with some VR things. I wanted to mention the projects that were mentioned in my bio. I got my start working in, oh, excuse me, I'll start the timer. I got my start working in VR in 1994 actually as producer and sort of creative director of a project working with Steven Spielberg on creating what you could call the first metaverse for children, a 3D interactive virtual world for seriously ill children. So we were working with doctors. We worked with 5 children's hospitals nationwide in the US, and with high-tech companies like Intel and Sprint, who are donating high-speed PCs and internet lines at a time when people did not have high-speed internet at home. So, this was actually Steven Spielberg's idea, to create a world where these kids who were confined to hospitals and to their homes would be able to run around in a virtual outside in a way that they couldn't run around in the real outside. But the doctors made it clear these kids were already nauseous from their medicines and from all the machines that they had to be connected to stay alive. So please, nothing like a VR helmet, which in those days also made even healthy people nauseous in at least, within 10 minutes. So I started out in this involvement with interactive 3D virtual worlds, really thinking about how you show it and whether or not that stereo headset was really necessary. You can see the quality of the graphics was very low, but when the kids saw E.T. running around, they knew that Steven Spielberg was in the space, and they were very excited to go there and meet him and chat with him. So this ran only a couple of years, from 94 to 97, and then the technology was still very unstable. And, the technology was being done by a company, Worlds Incorporated. I was an employee. And basically, when I left the company, when the project essentially development was finished, I realized this project is not going to live very long, because as soon as Starbright World lost interest, as soon as the company lost interest, basically the code wasn't maintained. So I took a lot of video, I took a lot of screenshots, and those are really probably the only way the world survives, this virtual world survives. So when I started using similar technology to create my own artworks, I was from the very beginning very aware of the fact that if I wanted to show this for more than a couple of years, I had to really think about preservation. So there was the piece that I started out with as my very first VR artwork was together with an Iranian-American, Zara Hushmand. I myself am half Japanese-American. And the topic was the Manzanar internment camps, the first of over 10 camps built to incarcerate Japanese-American families in World War II. Because a lot of our user group was going to be elderly and potential veterans with health issues, mobility issues, then it was also really clear to me, no VR helmets. So we used a large projection that gave the sense of being in an immersive space because it filled the peripheral vision. But it ran on one PC with one projector. It was monoscopic, it was not stereo. But this life-size projection with the image that went all the way down to the floor made your body feel like you could enter that space. We had a very simple joystick, exactly like the ones that people in motorized wheelchairs use to navigate through real space. We figured if they can do that, they can also navigate through virtual space, as hopefully my photograph proves. So this, I can claim, is the first still functional VR artwork acquired by a US art museum. And one question I have for Sasha is, how about the virtual Guggenheim created by Asymptote, which actually came out, I believe, in 2020, but I don't think is still working. But that is VRML, and there is actually still in the window of opportunity to conserve that. Maybe that's an offline discussion, but it's something I'd love to have with you. So this was acquired in 2002, shown for 2 years straight in highlights of the permanent collection, and then later in other ones. And then I updated it in 2017, so 15 years later, and it's still running. In fact, it's running much better than it did before. So here you see an image from 2002, when it was first shown at the San Jose Museum of Art, and you see that big case that a person is sitting on, that was holding the PC. It was a desktop PC, and it was holding an amp, and then the speakers were mounted on the walls, and there was not much light being blocked, so the image was washed out. Compare that to the one in 2019, which I was not involved in setting up, but they did such a beautiful job. I felt like, okay, my documentation was working. And they've actually told me that my documentation for this piece is among the best they have in their entire collection. So it's when they archived it in 2002, it turns out they surprised me. They actually archived the entire PC. It was a Windows 98 PC, and they
Tamiko, hang on, we're losing your sound. I think you have to unmute again. You sort of muted yourself. Here you go.
That's really weird. No idea how that happened. Okay, when did you stop hearing me?
Just when you started talking about that, they had the whole computer conserved.
Ah, okay, great. Right. So so they actually took the entire PC, which had the software installed on it, and then I gave them all my VRML code and the browser, and then of course all the assets, and then let's see, in 2017. I had been migrating the piece over the years, and Blackson actually went bankrupt in 2002, but a follow-on company, Bit Management, picked up the technology and developed it further, so I was able to use their browsers. And as luck would have it, Blackson was co-founded by my husband. The person who wrote the 3D browser was a personal friend, so I was able to give them feedback. Look, this isn't working. Can you please change it? So that's really kind of my secret weapon for having kept this alive so long, and also being able to, of course, on a Windows 10 PC, which in 2019 the San Jose Museum bought, then they were able to show it at a much higher quality level, and I was able to increase the resolution of a number of the images where I had higher resolution images. Let's see. So the VRML, I think I'm already at the halfway point. Oh no. Okay, I'll speed up a little. So VRML really is a text language. It's like HTML, but for 3D. So in some sense, that's pretty easy to read and be able to understand exactly how it's built. And I created this world by typing text into a text editor. I gave them as documentation a video walkthrough. There's about 13 scenes. So this is the selected scenes from the storyboard, where I told them, okay, this is how you enter the space. This is what you can do in this space and see in this space and hear in this space. And here's how you reach the next one. So this combination of the video and then my storyboard description turned out to be very helpful for people who hadn't seen the piece yet, but were supposed to set it up for the new exhibit. I also had collected a lot of background information on the project, dealing with a Japanese-American incarceration, dealing with legal disputes, and also dealing with the second layer, which was the Iranian-American threats to intern them after the hostage crisis of 79-80. So right now I'm involved in a very curious attempt, I'm not sure how well it'll work, to try and migrate it to something like a Mozilla Hubs world, a 3D virtual world developed in the San Jose State University Cadre program. And they're using Beyond Manzanar as a test case to see if they can port this, mildly complex work with 13 different scenes into a virtual world technology that they developed there. So now I'm switching to my first augmented reality piece. It came about in 2010 when a friend of mine, Mark Skoric, who was also working in VR, said, hey, we just realized that mobile phone technology is such that we can now use GPS to place our works anywhere we want in the world, including, for instance, in MoMA itself. So we're going to do this next week. Send me some content, we'll put it up for you. And this was really exciting. I couldn't go there, but they organized a flash mob of people who were there. And it turns out, they didn't ask permission from MoMA. They didn't tell MoMA they were doing this, but since they were part of actually of a public project for a conference, MoMA found out and actually tweeted it and saying, and so that of course was the best publicity we could ask for. This is the piece that I sent, a matrix of screening faces that seem to be screening AR will never be art. Forget it, wipe this off your phone. But that made us so enthusiastic that a bunch of us who had been working in technology then formed this group, manifest.ar. And together with Sander Wienhoff, organized our intervention in the Venice Biennial. This is the website that Sander did as a spoof on the Venice Biennial website. Here's just one shot of one of my pieces. We had 8 artists and each had 2 pieces in Venice. So now talking about extinction, this is a short list of apps that I have used and that are either extinct out of business or have kind of vanished from the radar as being not very useful. So I was really cognizant of this sort of obsolescence that came in very easily in this sort of new developing technology. I actually was using LAR from a company in Amsterdam, and that was fine until I got my commission from the Whitney Museum. I had had commissions from FACT in Liverpool and lots of other institutions, but this one was really kind of a big commission. I called my contact at LAR and they said, don't use our app. We're going to shut down the servers at the end of the year. So I was about to reply to Whitney and say, I'm sorry, I can't take the commission. There's no app right now that can do it. When, again, my husband, who had co-founded Black Sun Company before, said, okay, I will take time off from work and see if I can write you our own app to do it. So he did, and it worked. We were able to take the commission. The idea was we were supposed to cover the 6th floor terrace of the Whitney with some sort of algorithmic artwork. We had 2 iPads set up in the gallery with a view onto the terrace and the New York skyline. So when you came into the gallery, you saw the iPads immediately, and you saw the terrace and the skyline in the background. But you were also told that you could download it on your own smartphone and go out on the terrace. And in fact, the more people who did that, the more the AR bleached over time. So the more people who actually viewed the work on their own smartphones, the more the corals bleached over time, each person just being a small percent, but as a mass of people having a severe effect on the ecology of the system. So we had brought out a dedicated app for unexpected growth, and that is still in the Google Play and in the Apple App Store. And in fact, if you download it onto your smartphone and go around the Whitney, it's actually available in about a kilometer's radius around there. You don't even have to go in. So when the piece was acquired by the Whitney, we gave them our entire code base. We gave them, of course, all of the assets, but basically with the idea that at some point when Peter and I are not able to maintain it, and if they're still interested in showing it, they would have the assets that they would need to completely rewrite or migrate that app. Then it turns out that what happened after 2018 is that Peter decided to generalize that app. So it would we could use it for all of our other projects as well. He called it Artpoise and made it open source. And this is based on the Unity 3D editor, which over the years has then created their own AR foundation, incorporating ARKit and AR Core. So that's a common foundation that's used in a lot of apps. And because it's so common, we hope that it'll be maintained for a long time. And I personally have switched to use Blender as a 3D modeling tool because it is also an open free app. So this code base also we uploaded to the Whitney servers, and this will be what we will maintain going forward. So we only have one app to maintain that'll be for all of our projects. And again, it's in the Whitney also. At some point, we realized that because this was an open source project on GitHub, that it was preserved in the Arctic code vault, which somehow permafrost is not as permanent as we thought it would be, but maybe the Arctic code vault will survive. We'll see. But also I wanted to share with you the Whitney's 11-page paper that is gathering information for archiving projects. You see the link that I have to that. They said it's fine if I put it online and let you download to look at it. And I've just extracted a couple of points, and you can see how comprehensive it is, that it's not only installation photos, diagrams, scale plans, troubleshooting, research notes, background, all the sort of stuff that I actually intuitively sort of provided when we archived Beyond Manzanar at the San Jose Museum. Of course, all the source code, all the documentation for the source code, but then these selected questions, which for me are really the important thing about capturing what sort of experience do I as an artist want to provide, and also give an idea of, if the technology moves on, what are the things that are important to preserve and what are the things that don't really matter to me. So it's a lot of detail, but I think, and I'm actually not finished with it yet, but I think this is the sort of thing that you actually need in order to answer that question. So I've ran over, but I hope that's okay.
Thank you, Tamiko. That was really, really brilliant. And I'm loving the chat about the graveyard of old art apps as a new art project to be made. Thank you so much. We're going to head over to our second guest. Annette, would you like to introduce Paul?
Yeah, sure. Here we go. So this is the second guest here. We have Paul Tennent, who is an assistant professor in the mixed reality lab at the School of Computer Science at the University of Nottingham, where he works with artists on creative applications of a range of technologies. Recent projects include Threshold from 2017, Matt Collishaw recreation of the world's first photographic exhibition as an immersive multi-user VR experience, and I as Witness, a mixed reality experience about Holocaust photography that explores the political and moral motives for witnessing in 2020. Paul, the Zoom is yours.
Okay, lovely. Let me just share my screen. Thank you very much for that introduction. Well, you've slightly spoiled my talk. Right. Oh, you're all sitting on top of my talk. That's weird. Right, excellent. Yes, so I'm going to talk about a couple of VR experiences, but I think there's learnings from both of them. I'm going to talk about a little bit about what the experiences were, and then how we went about archiving and what sorts of things we got from them. And I'm going to talk quite a lot about context. So let's begin then. Oh no, that's not doing anything. Let's try again. Okay, so very briefly, mixed reality lab. So where I'm from, kind of lurking around University of Nottingham, been doing mixed reality for the last, well, I think the lab is now 23, going to be 24 this year. So it's even old enough to drink in the States. And it was really designed to explore what mixed reality was when we didn't really know what it was. It's explicit, exploring the boundary between physical and digital spaces. And yeah, this is Tamiko, at least in the room, will be very familiar with what mixed reality looked like back in 1999. It sits in computer science. It's not really a computer science lab because we're made up of a very interdisciplinary group, including artists, architects, sociologists, psychologists, etc., etc. We're a studio lab, so we have a very strong focus on making things and doing things in the wild. And as a general rule, we do practice-led or performance-led projects across a whole range of sectors. But for me, particularly, a lot of my work is around art and cultural heritage, as will be evidenced shortly when I talk about a couple of projects. So the first project I want to talk about is Thresholds. This is a project I did with Matt Collishaw and Pete James in 2017. And as Annette said, it was a recreation of the very first ever exhibition of photography. So slightly disputable, but William Henry Fox Talbot's 96 photogenic drawings, which he presented at King Edward's School in Birmingham in 18. I would have known this a few years ago and have a date for you, but I'm going to pretend that I know the date. And what you can see here is our virtual recreation. You can see the drawings in these vitrines sitting around the space. Now, it's fairly unusual even in 2017 as a multi-user VR experience. So we had lots of people in the room at once. Well, let's say lots. We had 6 people in the room at once wearing VR headsets. What was unique about Thresholds, though, other than its context, which is really important, this kind of convergence of, I've just realized I didn't start my timer. I'm going to just pause for a second to start my timer. This convergence of the kind of emergence of virtual reality or re-emergence of virtual reality and the emergence of photography was that it wasn't just wear a headset and look around. It was going weirdly. Why is my slide jumping? Right, there we go. We built a physical set. So everything you could see in Thresholds, you could touch. You could walk around. The vitrines were physically represented there. They had glass where there should be glass. They had wood where there should be wood. You walked around and you got a real sense of being in that space. Now, that's quite difficult to represent on a screen, but I will try and show a little video of what it looked like to be in Thresholds. I won't show you all of this video because it's quite long, but we've got somebody in the space wandering around. Now, interesting things in Thresholds, you could pick up the pictures. That's kind of interesting, but people really did engage with the space and they started interacting with it quite naturalistically, holding the window bars and looking out the window at the mob that were outside, and then say picking up the photographs here, which required a slightly odd gesture because the vitrines weren't open. We weren't sure if that was acceptable behaviour until we were told by a photographic historian that Fox Talbot would absolutely have opened the pictures. And so there's a couple of things going on in Thresholds. There is a fire here that is actually hot. So you got to the fire, it feels hot. There is a mirror. There's an image on the wall, which has a little spider crawling across it. But that image is actually a window in the real world, but I don't think there's a picture of it. That's a window you can engage with the participants. Anyway, right, so you've got the context for Thresholds, and hopefully PowerPoint will let me move on to the next slide. No, yes, there we go. Now, in terms of archiving it, there are a few kind of specific challenges. But one of the things we wanted to play with was archiving people's experience of it. Now, as academics, we do that typically by interviewing people, writing papers, etc. But the nice thing about virtual reality is it gives you a huge opportunity to capture computer data. What were people doing? Where was the headset in the space at any given time? And then turn that into kind of flattened heat maps, or in this case, kind of video heat maps. So we were able to show what somebody's trajectory around this space looked like. We were able to see what were the hot locations, what were the images that people spent most time looking at, what they spent most time picking up. Did they move at particular times? Was there a particular path through it? All of that's quite hard to get quantitatively for a physical experience, but it's trivial to get quantitatively for a virtual experience. So Thresholds has had about 10,000 people through it in its duration. And this is a cumulative heat map of, I think, the first 2,000 or so. But we're able to get that data. We're able to get complete data from everybody who comes through it, and that's quite unusual. You don't really get that with physical visitors in the same way you can get it from virtual visitors. So generally, the archiving of it, we took, as you might expect, we took video both inside and outside the headset, and it's really important to preserve that kind of mixed reality video of what people are doing in the real world and what they're doing in the virtual world at the same time. That's certainly important when you've got a experience that mixes both the real world and the virtual world, right? So if you have an experience where you're playing at home, you're wandering around a living room, it sort of doesn't matter what you're doing in the real world. But if you've got an experience where there is a physical presence to the exhibition, then it suddenly becomes very important to record that. So we did video, we did screenshots, we took lots of photographs, as you might expect. We also built a play-at-home version. So the play-at-home version was slightly disappointing because it lost the haptic sensation that you get. That was the real thrill of Thresholds, was touching stuff. And we lost that when we created the play-at-home version. But it still kind of gives you some idea of what the experience felt like. It still gives you that embodied experience of being there. And of course, I just mentioned kind of data-based visualizations, where it constructs a lot of data about what happened. When we built it, I used OpenVR for kind of beginnings of OpenVR. Actually, I built it with SteamVR, which then turned into OpenVR. And what's been really nice about that is that because that's been maintained, and it's looking like it's going to continue to be maintained. Every time I get a new VR headset, I can run Thresholds again, and it gets a little bit better. We ran it originally on HTC Vives. I've now got it running in a Vario XR3 kind of human eye resolution headset, and it's stunning. I'm seeing things in it that I'd never seen before, because all our textures were 12K. They were beautifully high quality textures, and they were running on these low resolution headsets. I think Tamiko mentioned earlier on being able to see her view of her 2002 system suddenly in 2019, and it just looked better. And that's really exciting to see an old experience preserved, brought back, and kind of applied with the latest tech. And I haven't ever had to recompile it for that. I've just been able to run it on newer and newer headsets. But none of these really capture the passive experience, the passive haptic experience, that sense of touch. So how to preserve that? Well, at the moment, we're playing around with active haptics. We've been making use of some equipment called Tesla suits and Tesla gloves, which use EMS, electromuscle stimulation, to make you believe you're touching things. And that's going some way to give us a sense of being able to touch those things in a way that kind of vibration doesn't really work. So that's as much as I want to say about Thresholds. I want to talk a little bit about the Eye as Witness, which is a slightly newer project. So trigger warning for everybody, this is a project about the Holocaust. So if that's an issue for you, please feel free to mute me. We were doing some work with the National Holocaust Museum, particularly looking at reframing Holocaust photography. How is it used? Why is it used for? And we wanted to think about the characteristics of photographs. So why are we doing this? Well, photographs are typically editorial. They have a purpose. They're taken for a reason. But there are some kind of challenging characteristics. They are static. They are restricted. And that restrictedness is kind of necessary for them to be editorial, right? If I want to frame a picture in a particular way, then I'm deliberately excluding what else is in it. Now, we've probably all seen quite a lot of recreations out there, recreations of there's a great one about the cockpit of a B-52 bomber. We've all seen photographs of it, but then you go into the recreation and look around, it's great. The recreations of Tutankhamun's tomb, there's lots of really good VR recreation experiences there. And they do offer a lot of opportunity for exploring spaces, for understanding the history. They're dynamic, they're exciting, but they also risk trivializing content. And that's something we were very concerned about with this particular project. You also end up re-editorializing the photographs. You're trying to tell a particular story through it, and that's a problem. So what was interesting for us is that the majority of the photographs we have from around that time were not taken by victims, they're taken by perpetrators. These are mostly Nazi photographs. So maybe we do want to re-editorialize them, but how should we do that in an appropriate way? I think the other key risk is novelty. You don't want to create something that's fun for a few days and then stops being powerful. So that meant we had to spend quite a lot of time thinking about how we were going to do it, how we were going to choose a photograph that was kind of ethically appropriate. So this is a photograph from the ghetto uprising in Warsaw, rather than a camp photograph, although we did have them. We spent a lot of time staging the scene, working out what should be in it. So this is a project about exposing what's behind the photograph, what's not in the photograph. And so we had to guess, and that's a bit of a problem when you're dealing with a context like the Holocaust, right? You can't reasonably make stuff up. So what we did was we worked from a photographic library where we had an awful lot of images taken around the same time in different locations. And we were able to kind of extrapolate from that a reasonable guess about what was behind the scene. And so we wanted to provide quite a lot of context to this. I have got a video of this in a moment. But I think the most important thing here is, for me, is the context of the experience. So it's not just a recreation of a photograph. It's a recreation of a photograph being taken, and that needs to be carefully contextualized because Holocaust. So we start the experience in a modern gallery. It's a kind of imagination of a Holocaust gallery. We've got large photographs on the walls, and all the photographs on the walls are the evidence that we used to create our reconstruction. We've got a view out the window, which is actually where the photograph was taken. So to kind of contextualize it again with the modern context. And so we start our experience in there, and then hopefully this will play. We're in our modern gallery. We have a look around. We're wearing a VR headset at this point, and then we literally walk into the photograph. So as a user, we're walking through a physical representation of the photograph into a virtual reconstruction. And we could look around, see the context, see what wasn't in the photograph. That's the idea, see the photographer. Importantly, see the overwhelming military presence, which is not shown in the photograph. So in this image, you can see the context. So this was presented within the context of a wider exhibition. So you do this experience that's supposed to sensitize you to think about the purpose of the photograph, and then you go and discover a lot of photographs taken by Jewish photographers at the same time that are not familiar at all. And so you have this activity of physically walking through the photograph as well as virtually walking through the photograph. You can just about see it in this image. The photograph is projected on a string curtain, and so you physically walk through the string curtain as you move from the recreation, or rather you move from the gallery into the recreation. And this context was absolutely critical to the experience. So it's not just a VR experience. So how do you archive that? Well, we did have a little problem. We opened it in March 2020, which is the perfect time to open an exhibition, as I'm sure some of you are aware. So we then had to think, okay, well, how can we make this work? So we made a zero-touch version of it. So using Google's MediaPipe, which is technically an AR technology in my book. We had a little system where instead of putting on a VR headset, we projected onto a very large screen. And then you would simply put your hand above a camera, detect your hand, and then you could move through the exhibition by rotating your hand in various ways. So a gesture-controlled system. What's quite useful about this was that it forced me to create a non-virtual reality version of a VR experience, so a non-headset version of VR experience. So I had to create a kind of take-home version, but I found it quite disappointing. It didn't feel to me like it was carrying all the context. It worked in this case because we were actually in a museum, so we had the rest of the exhibition there. That context was still preserved, but this version still didn't preserve the context. So we thought, okay, we're going to take it online. Let's do that. Let's archive the experience online. I had this little joke about what museum websites tend to look like. Now, they're not all like this. There are some wonderful ones, but a lot of them are kind of flat. This is the Holocaust Center's exhibition, right? There's a lot of photographs, pictures of what things were, bits of text, but they sort of lack interactivity. So we decided to try and build an online version of the exhibition. So we took the whole exhibition online, not just the VR part, but we constructed a 3D navigable version. And you can see in the middle of this image on the left side there is a recreation of my walkthroughable VR experience and a little VR headset. So you could walk up to that VR headset in the, I'm going to call it the game. It wasn't a game, but in the recreation. You could put on the VR headset and you could walk through that picture and it would take you into the recreation. You walk back out the picture again, all online. And then you could walk around and you could see critically the rest of the context, the extra panels that were in the exhibition. This was really simple to make because I'd already made the initial gallery as part of the experience. And we had the 3D models from the exhibition creators. So we had everything we needed to put this together. It was just a matter of assembling it in Unity and exporting it as a WebGL. To give it a bit more life, I added a camera to it. So you can see on the right-hand side, you can hold up a camera in this exhibition, you can take photographs, and then at the end of the experience, you get a PDF with all your photographs. A scrapbook comes back. This was being created for schools, so we wanted this kind of school-friendly scrapbook experience. So my method of archiving in this case was to kind of whole-scale turn the experience into an online recreation of not just that little bit of exhibition, but the whole exhibition. And that seemed to me to be a really powerful way of archiving an experience. So we did it much the same: videos, photos, screenshots, but then these two play-at-home versions that maintained the exhibition context. And then, as with thresholds, I did a lot of heat maps, a lot of data-based visualizations of the experience. Now, these are just two examples of lots and lots of mixed reality work that we've done over the last several years. I can talk to you about herding, literally herding cats at some point, and how on earth we're going to archive that. I haven't quite worked that one out yet. One last thing I just want to kind of flag up is that in terms of AR, I'm kind of interested in how you create a virtual AR experience. If I had made an AR experience, this camera here could very well be running the AR application. So it could be walking around, experiencing what somebody experienced in AR in a virtual recreation. So I'm quite interested in recreation as a method of archiving. And that is me slightly overrun because I forgot to start the timer, but I'm done.
Thank you, Paul. So many rich questions there, especially given our context here at the Photographers Gallery. Walking through the image, what is an image and how do we understand that today? My brain is melting. Annette, would you like to introduce our third and final speaker?
Yes, absolutely. So here we have Sasha Arden, and they are the Conservation Fellow, Time-Based Media at the Solomon R. Guggenheim Foundation and Museum, as Katrina mentioned in the beginning. They graduated in 2022 from the dual degree master's program in art history and conservation at the Institute of Fine Arts, NYU, with a focus in time-based media. Sasha embraced the long-term thinking and development of appropriate stewardship practices while negotiating ecosystems of stakeholders and values unique to each artwork. Their ongoing research examined the intersection of technical capabilities and the philosophical and ethical questions arising through the conservation process, often questioning conventional approaches in pursuit of a holistic outlook on the integrity of cultural assets. Sasha, please. Take the Zoom.
Thanks so much for that introduction, Annette. And I'll go ahead and share my screen, but I think it's really wonderful to see Paul and Tamiko already thinking about archiving, as I'm sure they've learned they must in order to see these projects have some kind of lifetime beyond the immediate exhibition context. So last year, oops, sorry about that, everybody. Okay. So last year, I wrote a research paper under the auspices of Tate's Preserving Immersive Media group during an internship placement to complete my degree requirements for NYU's conservation program in time-based media. The research topic was documentation of experience of immersive media, which had been identified as one of the areas for further investigation in Jack McConkey and Tom Enson's excellent report on preserving virtual reality artworks. Their paper is a really great resource outlining the complex technologies used in immersive media and the major concerns for preservation that follow from rapid development of proprietary technologies, commercial access policies, and obsolescence. Documentation of experience came about from the recognition that experience is an integral part of understanding the significant properties of immersive media artworks, which could be used to inform how they're reactivated, if possible. That, if possible, disclaimer is not usually so quickly invoked in conservation. But in this case, there are so many potential obstacles in the process of re-exhibiting immersive artworks and such a short window of opportunity in which to create effective documentation while the technological ecosystem is functioning. And I'll just kind of put in an asterisk here that I am very much embedded in an institutional context. So please take all my comments in with a grain of salt that, you know, I'm not speaking in a context in which artists and makers are doing their own archiving, but it's really in a collection context of kind of handing over the keys in a sense. So because the various forces exerted, forces exerted over time, immersive media hardware might become historical artifacts that break and can't be repaired or replaced. App development and distribution platforms change, and compatibility with hardware changes. Graphics rendering tool chains might fail, and account validation systems for developers and users will fall out of service. These are complex technologies that require expertise to work with effectively, and that expertise is subject to market forces and time as well. Many of these dependencies are completely out of our control, and there isn't really a way to recreate the corporate infrastructures that support these technologies. Unlike other time-based media, generally speaking, immersive media can't yet be emulated or migrated effectively in all cases. There are efforts to develop open platforms and to remove proprietary hardware and software dependencies, but that development might well be outpaced by obsolescence of existing artworks. If we've learned anything about conservation of complex technologies, it's that no two artworks are the same. So there's no cure-all solution to apply across the board. In this scenario, being responsible for preservation necessitates thinking beyond conventional approaches, like maintaining physical materials and documenting how the technologies work. Documentation may be the only thing that persists for some immersive media. And this potential already raises the stakes for creating high-quality documentation as a bridge to understanding what these artworks were and what they did. It also raises questions in line with preservation of ephemeral mediums like a performance. How does the archive of an artwork relate to the artwork itself? One way to research documentation of user experience as a component of such an archive would be to identify some technological tools and methods to record what happens while an immersive artwork is activated. And we've seen some great examples of that from both Tamiko and Paul so far. But the question of involving other people, the users who are having the experiences we're interested in, that raises many more questions about the ethics of how and why such information is gathered, and that information's archival lifecycle. This is where my paper ultimately focused, and I'll share an overview of my ideas in the short time I have here to introduce them before we have a discussion. So first, I want to take a moment to specify what I mean by experience, especially in terms of creating artwork documentation. There is no authoritative or ideal capital E experience to be identified as a reference. I have to point this out in part because the idea behind documentation, and by extension, conventional preservation activities, is to reproduce or maintain some referential state. We can certainly talk more about that idea, but reproduction really doesn't apply to experience. Experience is by nature highly individual, affected by each of our own imperfect bodies that perceive what's happening, our life histories and interpretations of events. We can't even have the same experience twice. So how would we model documentation of experience? So when I say experience in the context of artwork documentation, what I mean is a definitive moment of encounter by a person whose perceptions are contingent and ephemeral and not reproducible. This experience is influenced by the individual having the encounter, by artistic intent, which presumably has some presence and force, socio-technical context, which is the milieu of culture and technologies of a given time and place, and finally, the performance of the technologies being used. Differences in these ingredients will produce different experiences. And while there may well be some overlap, no two experiences will be identical. What would we try to preserve then? What is an achievable goal in this situation? While it's not possible to make an experience replicable per se, it is reasonable to make it accessible in some form for the purpose of understanding the nature of encounters with particular immersive media works in a certain socio-technical moment. So with these guidelines of what experience means and what to work toward, I realized that existing models of documentation practice and access and use don't quite meet these needs. One important shift is to center the user in relation to technology in order to better understand how that relationship is conceptualized and what is prioritized in documentation. Existing documentation models from time-based media largely use what I call an outside-in approach, where material properties determine how content is rendered and experienced. Information like technical features, specifications, settings, and hardware or software parameters are presumed to reproduce experience through preserving technical behaviors. In this concept, the technological system is the point of origin for the identity of the work and how it's experienced. On the other hand, an inside-out approach takes experience as the point of origin, revealing significant properties that guide how content is rendered. Information like motion quality, degree of presence, and reaction times for interactive elements can be used to inform methods of display. This can allow for some flexibility in the technological system and prioritizes attention to experience while creating documentation. And these ideas aren't necessarily opposed. In fact, they can work together along with artistic intent to weave a more coherent account of significant properties and to inform decision-making for documentation and conservation activities over time. Taking an additive, inclusive approach to gathering and using information is part of my arguments overall. An encouraging shift has started to take hold within conservation around reconsidering how to practice care through our work. There are many influences for this shift, way more than I could possibly talk about, in this one event even. And my thinking is also partly informed by archivists such as Michelle Caswell, who critique the colonial roots of collection and archiving and advocate for feminist and queer approaches to the power dynamics inherent to gathering information, keeping it, and granting access to it. Elia Marcel's scholarship on conservation of performance and contemporary art foregrounds the social nature of preservation, focusing on the person-to-person exchanges and firsthand experiences that take place when learning about an artwork. Libby Ireland, Jack McConkey, and Flaminia Fortunato have spoken about their changing practices of relating to artists, highlighting the trust that can be built between people while the institution as an entity presents obstacles. Their accounts of attention to artists' needs and a willingness to try new approaches when business as usual doesn't work are very much aligned with the ethics I advocate for in creating documentation of user experiences. Other questions follow from thinking about how to incorporate experience into documentation and cataloging processes. A post-human collections approach, as outlined by Fiona Cameron, conceptualizes the so-called collection object, not simply as an instance of a physical composition, but a composition of interactions between its thingness or its material presence, its historicity, and the values endowed to it. The social and the material come together, forming a different kind of story about why a particular thing is important to people. In the same way, gathering information about immersive media beyond technical data to include experience enables a more contextual understanding. And this also offers opportunities to approach record making and access differently by moving away from colonial and extractive attitudes and practices while working with and for people. A supporting role that is grounded primarily in providing infrastructure for open records would shift the dynamic away from gatekeeping, which has been a criticism leveled at institutions, and toward wider engagement with their purposes, considering authorship and positionality as part of gathering experiential information acknowledges the power dynamics inherent in creating knowledge through valuing others' perspectives. As a conservator, I'm interested in how to enable a continued life for artworks. There are many potential interpretations of what that could mean, and sometimes multiple ways to achieve that goal. And what I've tried to show through my research into documentation of experience for immersive media is that it's more than just getting the right data. Under the pressure of imminent obsolescence, it certainly matters that specific information is recorded while it remains accessible in a functioning technical system. But when it comes to the crucial aspect of experience, the ethical framework and values that determine what methods are used can affect the quality of information that is gathered. And that will ultimately affect the possible outcomes for preservation efforts and for future understanding of experiential works. I just have a quick thank you slide for all of the people who supported this event today, and also research that I'm discussing right now. And I really couldn't have been done without the foundations of other innovative scholarship and open, honest dialogue with colleagues who deeply care about the work that we do and our ethics while we're doing it. And I very much look forward to the discussion today and learning with everyone who could join in this moment. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Sasha, for that brilliant end to our panel presentations, and really deep thinking about this turn to the experiential and its politics and affordances, and how that works in institutions was brilliant. Thank you so much for bringing those points up towards the end. Annette, shall we open up to questions? Now, what we'd like to do is we'll go through people who have existing questions in the chat, and we'll invite you, if you feel comfortable, to speak those questions to the speakers yourself. However, if you're not comfortable with doing that, Annette and I can, of course, speak on your behalf. Annette, did we have a question ready to go from the audience?
Yeah, there was indeed already a question by Luisa La Concha. Luisa, are you comfortable to reiterate your question? It was for Tamiko. I don't know if you can actually unmute yourself.
I did see her question in the
Shall I just briefly repeat it? Yeah. So everyone has that on the vision again. So her question is, how easy is it for independent artists to use these apps and place, quote unquote, their artwork in specific geographical locations?
And the question is, it depends on how comfortable you are. It's not a drag and drop interface. Peter has been the only one doing the development up till now. I'd been hoping that we would have other developers on board who would improve the interface. It hasn't happened yet. We do basically artists with good media sort of technology backgrounds and who are comfortable using FTP services to upload content. You do need a little bit more of sort of a technical charge. If you haven't done anything more than Photoshop, then it'll probably be a bit complex. And that tends to be basically the problem, that either you use an app or a system that is very easy to use, but that means that it's been produced by a large company, who might discontinue it whenever they choose to, in 6 months or 3 years. Or you use a more complicated system that's for instance, more open source and has, you know, 1 to a couple of people working on it to maintain it, and it requires a lot more work from the person using it. So I typed in the ARPOI's website. There's information there. If you're interested, you can contact us. But if you're looking for a drag and drop interface, then it's definitely requires more complexity than that.
I'm seeing your hand up, Paul, but maybe before we go there, I have maybe a follow-up question that kind of relates to this ease of use and experience, in a sense. And that's basically to all 3 of you who've just been speaking now. And I'm quite interested in hearing from each of your positions in a way. And Tamiko, is something that you already alluded to as well. How do you see the relation between the artist, researcher, and institutional, the strategies and the opportunities between them? Because they often seem to be quite separated, but yeah, what are the sort of strategies and opportunities that we could really draw from?
Yeah, that's an incredibly broad spectrum. So, so I think, you know, actually Paul might be more directly on the interface of that question, since he's working in an institution. I mean, as an artist, basically, I'm interested in putting my energy into creating artworks, not into developing tools. So I was very happy when my husband stepped in and said, well, I'll do the tool development. And he also participates in the art part. But usually universities have to focus much more on creating new tools or creating, you know, investigating problems. And those are not stable enough for institutions to want to deal with them. So, so the art world itself and institutions that might collect them, for them, of course, stability is an issue, and that immediately pushes you away from the research into a much more stable and for research purposes, very boring platform. Paul, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, I would tend to agree. I think from the perspective of working in a university that works very closely with artists a lot, I think we have this specific challenge of constantly kind of creating very brittle things, which if you push them too hard, break horribly, but then also trying to deliver them in such a way that they are, you know, they are going to survive their run, they're going to survive their tours. And we have a different, I think we have an interesting approach in universities to the archival process, right? Because for us as the universities, what we get out of the partnership with the artists, other than the joy of seeing a piece of art, is, you know, our bibliometrics. We're trying to write papers. That's fundamentally what we do. And so in order to do that, we have to document in a very different way, and we have to assess that experience in quite a different way. And so I think, interestingly, the art pieces that are associated with the university get a unique form of archiving that isn't quite the same as what you would get if you create something yourself, or you have something that is professionally archived. They're 2 slightly different outcomes. And I'm not suggesting that an academic paper is necessarily a good archival piece, but it certainly is an archival piece. And there tends to be a lot of, because we're bound by privacy laws and so on, you know, any data we capture has to be held for a long time. So there's some kind of inherent archiving that's happening there. I wanted to very briefly reflect on your discussion of apps and the difficulty of using them. And you know, I definitely feel everybody's pain there. But I think one of the things that I'm seeing that's quite interesting happening at the moment is there's been a huge rise in the amount of work being done with ARJS, and particularly kind of A-frame, which is a front end to ARJS. So ARJS is for those who aren't aware of it, is a web browser based AR system. So it doesn't require any apps, and that's kind of critical to it. Is that we always have this problem of, I've made this amazing thing, but you have to download the app to play with it. We run into that a lot, and I think there was a comment earlier on about lots of dead apps in people's phones, or at least historical apps in people's phones. So I'm kind of interested in how much we can do in that kind of online in-browser experience. I mean, now we're getting to the point where if you've got a QR code, your phone camera automatically scans it and responds to it. That can take you straight into a new application without ever downloading anything, without ever having to go through that process, and really kind of speed up the connection to the apps. And the nice thing about that is JavaScript is unlikely to be going anywhere for quite a long time. I mean, browsers have a history of support going back a very long way. We're still expected to support Internet Explorer 7 if we make professional websites, because there are still a couple of people out there still using it. It creates all manner of headaches for those building things. But the history of, I guess it's not archiving so much as past support is definitely there with that front end, and that doesn't exist with apps. I've got lots of apps that I can't open anymore that I would love to be able to. I'm like, oh, I really want to see that thing, and I can't because they just don't work anymore. That's not going to happen with websites, at least for now. There's a fun activity that he's had of like just going exploring the old Angel Fire websites, and really old early 90s websites. It's quite they're fun to look at. So I think that's a possibility for kind of long-term AR survival. We've drifted away from the original topic, for which I apologize. I'll stop talking.
Just a comment there. Peter also looks into the web AR every now and then, and his take is that yes, it works if you use exactly this web browser on this device, but not if you use that browser on the other device, and therefore sort of the promise of write once, use everywhere seems to be more ephemeral than.
Yeah, it's getting better, but I completely agree with you. I mean, we had this problem with Unity, and with everything that's a write once, run everywhere has the same promise, but lack of reality. But things like A-frame are really helping with this because they bridge onto AR Toolkit and AR Core.
Can I jump in and direct another question in the chat by the lovely Sarah Cook? Hi, Sarah. You are pinned under a cat, so you are unable to bring your physical voice to this discussion. But I thought that maybe Sasha would like to think about this question, which is, I'm wondering if anyone has strategies for convincing museums to archive, preserve, even collect more visitors' experiences of immersive works. What needs to shift?
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Sarah. And I think it's a sticky argument to be positioned within an institution and tell the institution to do more when everyone is overworked and everything is underfunded. So, when I'm as I'm writing my paper and as I'm doing these talks, like I can hear all of the arguments and all of the groans and all of the like, well, that's just not possible. But the reality is that these artworks are being collected, and if we don't want them to be obliterated, we have to do the extra work of gathering this kind of information. And part of my paper goes into just building up this argument a little bit of like, you can't, more or less backing people into the corner. Like you can't actually get out of it. And I also try to build in citations of existing strategies for capturing user experiences. There have been interactive works for decades at this point. And many of the people actually in this talk today are, people who have done this research and made these publications. So I'd love to hear from them as well about their experiences. They're, able and willing to speak up about it. But I think really a kind of hard reality, and the simple answer is there needs to be more funding. There needs to be more staff kind of bandwidth to do this. I know in my current position as a fellow at the Guggenheim, I've been working on a case study of a VR artwork that I started almost a calendar year ago, and I'm still not done kind of creating that documentation and documenting my own process of creating the documentation as we do. So that is it is a difficult reality, no two ways about it.
I wonder if I could segue then over to Paul with a related question, which was, what was the feedback from audiences on your Holocaust project, and how did you capture this beyond sort of heat maps and other forms of data?
So broadly, incredibly positive. We had quite a lot of concern going into it for a number of reasons. We spent quite a lot of time working through and co-designing with first-generation Holocaust survivors to make sure that we were getting the tone right and kind of working it up ethically correctly. Now, most of the audience of that particular museum are school children and school groups. So we had a very strong educational bent to how it was being done, and that inherently meant that we were able to kind of extract feedback from them, because you can kind of contract with the schools that you're going to do this thing, and then there's going to be a lesson that's written around this, and we're able to kind of build into the lesson direct feedback and direct discussion around the mixed reality experience that they've had. So working with schools is quite useful. I mean, working with schools in some ways is an absolute nightmare because there's all kinds of extra ethical hoops you have to jump through. But in other ways, it's actually really useful because this constrained group that you've got for an hour, and you can actually get them to answer questions and have a discussion about what they've done. And so we recorded a huge amount of that discussion. We spent a lot of time with people who went through the experience, again, kind of interviewing them after the event with a view to writing up what we're doing. Kind of mentioned earlier on this kind of academic approach to archiving. When we left it live in other locations, we encouraged comment cards, not an unfamiliar approach, I'm sure. And I have all those comment cards archived, and in fact, in the virtual version of the exhibition, there is an equivalent of the comment cards, and it has all the physical ones and all the digital ones represented in there, and you can go and leave a note, and that has to be, interestingly, from an archiving perspective, that has to be regularly kept an eye on, because it's such a sensitive topic. You have to kind of vet any notes that come into it first. Understanding the experience of the virtual version is more difficult. I think because it exists as a website, it's much more of a challenge to capture people's experience of it. I have kind of deeply quantitative logs, but getting that qualitative experience from people, other than sitting down next to them and asking them to go through it and give us think alouds and experiential discussions and draw out trajectories of what they did. We can do it for a certain number of people, but I can't get the majority the way we can in the physical space. So it's a real challenge. But yeah, on the plus side, people seem to like it. If you want to try it, you might be able to. It might break, but I'll put the URL for the digital version on here. If I can remember it.
Thanks, Paul. Annette, well, the next question was, I think, Chris.
There's a question by Jack here. Jack, are you around to talk?
I can do. Yeah. I'm in evening mode, having been covered in mashed avocado by my baby. So I'm going to go camera off, if that's okay. Yeah, I just thank you so much for all of the amazing presentations. Tamiko's point there about when they faced obsolescence, I'm basically just going to read out my question now. That they were able to engage their kind of closest networks, say, oh, well, actually, that was my partner who actually built that. And that just kind of made me think something that we've all encountered, which is when, as conservators, you contact, like a commercial, kind of enterprise, and you're met with a kind of closed door. And I was just amazed at the contrast between these two things. And I wondered whether there was whether there was something in between, and whether that was and then trying not to make a statement. I was like, well, this is a question about like networks, and since we were talking about like data and experience and thinking about how that could expand to include the user, I also wondered whether that could kind of expand to include networks as well, maybe. So I don't know, maybe that's more than one question.
Yeah, I think we're, you do have more luck if you can go to, for instance, an open source community. If there's already an existing community around a certain technology, then you've got this group of technologically engaged people who are much more interested, because it's also their baby, of helping you use it and take care of problems. So that's why I like using open source software where possible. It just seems like, in our personal case, it seems like, there's so many companies rushing into the AR space with their own platforms, and if it's on like Instagram or Facebook or Snap, then they've got a huge user base. And so that sucks in all these people, and you can't compete with them in that sense. So those are sort of up and down sides. But yeah, and then the question of whether you register, maybe Paul would know more about tracking user experience within sort of open source, open community software.
There certainly is I think a lot of the tools are similar. I think our user experience tracking has typically been ours, in that we've kind of built it into our experiences as we go along. So from our perspective, it doesn't make a huge difference in terms of what we get back from users, whether we're using open source or whether we're using closed source systems. I will say I completely agree with you though, Tamiko. We try and push as hard as we can into using open source for almost everything. So we're shifting all our current work from Unity towards using Godot, which is the open source game engine. Moving all our modeling from 3D Max into Blender, and making sure that everything we publish is fully open source as well. So I think it's a really important activity to be considering, because it allows for the possibility of continuation, right? If said company folds, program is broken, but if it's open source, it's it solves that problem.
Yeah, I can say just in trying to create documentation and understand a piece, in the case study I'm working on, which is made in Unreal Engine, I mentioned I'm still working on this after a year, and probably most of that has been just setting up the technical requirements, recreating what that production environment was, and making those files actually open, and then learning the interface. Because, as conservators, we're dealing with all kinds of technologies, so it's always a learning process to understand what is happening. And with immersive technologies, they're extremely complex. I'm sure that there are still things that I don't know, even after a year of poking around. I'm not trained as a producer of these technologies. So a lot of our dependencies do go out to other expertise, or, other people who have been researching this and might have pointers, building relationships with production studios, and other conservators and digital preservation folks who have experience with this. So, you know, one of the greatest assets that I have is just my community of people that I can reach out to, and I know we can help each other out.
So, Sasha, there was years ago, and maybe even like 10 years ago or longer, there was some sort of initiative. I think John Ippolito was doing it maybe at the Guggenheim. There's an initiative for different museums to share knowledge and resources for conserving media art. And I was hearing a lot about it for a while. And for the last maybe 10 years, I haven't heard anything. Do you know if that still exists? Because of course,
Well,
for instance, all the materials that I have from San Jose State cadre are addressing exactly the same things which the Whitney's 11-page questionnaire is addressing, and they're common questions. It seems like there should be more working together between institutions.
Sure. Yeah, I think you're referring to the variable media network, which was indeed Guggenheim was part of that. And I can say that there are many other kind of collaborative approaches and initiatives that are happening to have institutions work together. We are constantly sharing our documentation templates with each other and improving upon them. A lot of them are actually kind of posted on GitHub as well. So, thankfully that stuff is kind of out in the community and being developed constantly. And I want to also just post a link to, there's a Preserving Immersive Media knowledge base that was started up by the Preserving Immersive Media group at Tate. So I'll put that in the chat, and that is a nice resource, kind of a living document that people can contribute to or take from as they need.
There's a piece of work that a colleague of mine is doing with me that we're just kind of getting started on, but I just wanted to flag up because I think it's quite interesting. So it's called the Museum of Everything. And the idea is to use virtual machines and spawn virtual machines on. So we have a virtual environment, which is an infinitely scalable virtual environment. So you can walk around it forever in your own house. It creates rooms on demand. And the idea is that it can spawn virtual machines of phones, of Windows, of Macs, of whatever age we've got operating systems for. You can spawn up a virtual machine and run a system in it, and it's got fake projectors, it's got fake screens, all those kinds of things, so that you can recreate. So if I need to run something from Unreal 2017, I can spawn up a machine as it would have been in 2017, run it within this virtual environment, and be able to kind of produce my exhibition there. That's it's quite a big project, and it's going to take a certain amount of time to get properly off its feet, but it's quite an interesting approach to dealing with these things, is to use these virtual machines. And you could do that anyway, but we're trying to put them into a space, so you kind of ways of accessing these computers that will potentially allow us to rerun old things. Now, there's always going to be machines we don't have. I think our chances of being able to virtualize a silicon graphics machine kind of low, but we've got everything from 8086s up to, I can virtualize a PS4, I think, not a PS5 yet. But that's quite an interesting project. Is like, well, can you create a space in which you can just have whatever computer you need? And because we can use cloud services to spawn and run those machines on demand, we can build this kind of like archival space. And I'm hoping we'll be able to make it configurable. But ask me again in 3 years.
We're at time now for this event, but there's one question that's still outstanding that hasn't been posed, which, if I may quickly pose it for a very quick response. And this was from Chris King, who's also currently trapped under a baby. So I will ask it on behalf of Chris. And this perhaps speaks back to some of the points that Sasha raised around the kind of orthodoxy of technology as experience rather than the user. And Chris says, is focusing on experience/service to the user and abstracting away from the medium-specific properties of each technological substrate only viable where artists are not intervening at that level. So only a viable approach with some types of AR, VR practice or works in general and not others. Are there any comments from the panel on that one?
Well, I would be really interested to, you know, get a drink with Chris and talk that out sometime. That's quite a question, and my only response really is that we're working with, you know, with living artists and with studios, so it's always for me a conversation with them to begin with. What can we do? What can we not do?
Wonderful. Tamiko, you're about to jump in, and Paul, sorry.
I was about to jump in and say, I'm not sure if I understood the question.
I was going to agree with Sasha that I think that the focus on technology is probably not the correct focus, and the focus on intention. And can you archive and recreate the intention of what that artist was trying to do is the key point. And maybe, you know, wearing my technologist hat, I focus a bit too much on can I recreate the exact circumstances of how it was running, and a little bit less on how am I going to negotiate with you who created it how to make a long-running preserved version. But that only works as long as we have access to the artists who are making this stuff. So we're in a privileged position just now that most of the work that are in these, using these media are still being made by artists we have access to. How long that will last though.
Great, well, thank you so much for our panelists. I wonder if we could all unmute our microphones, and with crying babies and all and cats, let them hear our appreciation of tonight's discussion. Thank you. I will clap hard for everyone. Thank you everyone for your comments and contributions and thoughts and attendance. We'll be able to continue this conversation at Lima on the 16th and 17th of March. And I should also plug Annette's book, which she's done with Gabriella, which has just been released in relation to this research project. Annette, can you tell us what the name of this book is and how exciting it is?
What's the title again? Documenting digital art, and then something else. I'll post it in the chat. Here we go. Thank you. It's out there. Documentation is art, of course. Oh.
Thank you, Sasha.
Thank you.
Your excellent marketing skills are very appreciated. So great. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a lovely evening wherever you are, or morning, and we'll see you next time. Thanks again.